She didn't get a birth certificate until she was 9. She avoids questions about her family, and she's never even heard of the Holocaust. And she's 6, and she has to make a decision to run away with her grandma who's going to Arizona. She talks about the school bus driving by her house every day. She gets sucked into this like indoctrination of like extreme right-wing Mormonism type stuff. What is up, everybody? Welcome to the Done Before Dawn podcast. I'm your host, Isaac Skin and Bones Jones. Today's episode, we're going to talk about the best book that I have read this year, in the last year, since last March. Absolutely got sucked into this book. I read it in 2.5 days, the fastest I've ever read a book in a long time. I probably haven't read a book that fast since maybe middle school. This book has completely changed my life, has made me become more grateful for the things that I have. It's made me more gracious towards my parents, especially about how I was raised. This book is really fundamental in like shaping how we view the world, especially as people who are trying to learn, who are searching for that education. This book is called Educated by Tara Westover. It is a New York Times #1 bestseller. It's a memoir of her childhood growing up into adulthood, how she escaped her family and became educated and like completely turned her life around. The divide that runs into her family about education. It's just so good. I bought it on the Kindle. I've really gotten a kick out of American Buffalo by Stephen Ranella, and I'm really into these like narrative nonfiction books to where it's like someone's telling you a story, but the story is it's a true story. It's based on a true story. So like with a lot of fiction books, unless they're written really well, if you read them at the end, you kind of feel like you didn't get a whole lot out of them. I'm a big fan of nonfiction because I feel like I've invested my time well a lot of times. And so whenever I get onto narrative nonfiction like these books that are story-based, like they're written as a narrative, but they are telling a true story, I just absolutely love them. Books like American Buffalo, books like Educated, books like In Cold Blood by Truman Capote, those books that are overarching stories, but they really, they're narratives, but they tell you a true story that you can actually relate to, something that happened. Those are the best books in my opinion. So, what happens with Tara Westover? So Tara Westover, let me go how I found this book. I found this book Googling narrative nonfiction, literally, and it was the #1 book on the recommendations list, and it was published in 2018. So of course I had to read it. I bought it on my Kindle. We had back-to-back snow days, so I didn't work for school, and I read it literally in 2.5 days. I bought it one morning. I bought it at 3 in the morning because I couldn't sleep. I woke up. I read from like 3 to 7. And then read for like a full day after that, and then in the morning the day after that, and just got it done. It was such a good book. But Tara Westover starts her life off in Idaho. The spoilers ahead. Just if you want to read this, keep listening. I won't give too much away. A lot of the stuff is in the book is really heavy and something that you need to read, not be told about. But she starts off her life in Idaho. Her parents are Mormon, far right wing, like extremists. Her dad is like a big survivalist. He's really focused on like their family becoming independent. He thinks the end days are coming. He's really obsessed with like the Book of Revelations. And she like the opening passage of the book is like when she's 6 and she has to make a decision to run away with her grandma who's going to Arizona, who thinks that she should be put into a proper school and not homeschooled, or if she should stay with her father in Idaho and still work in his scrapyard. So her father is a high school dropout, doesn't really believe in public school, doesn't believe in government indoctrination, and he wants his kids to be raised like on a farm and independent. But things turn really south really quick. Early on in her life, she remembers that her mother wanted to homeschool her, but her dad always pulled the kids out to go work in the scrapyard. Her dad was a scrapper. They didn't have a whole bunch of money. They weren't poor. Her dad kind of hates established society. He hates mainstream Mormons. He hates mainstream anything. There's like a very small sect of Mormons that he agrees with. And he is really just in general kind of a butthole, how he treats her. There's so many stories in here of her father mistreating her and her being abused by her brothers and her family. And there's not a whole lot of there's reverence given to the family, but there's this divide that comes between the 7 kids. So she grows up. Her dad doesn't believe in taking anybody to the hospital. Her brother gets in a major accident, and the dad has to make a decision between like keeping his values or actually taking him to an actual hospital. He decides to keep his values. Or one of her brothers falls off of a pallet, and they still don't know who called 911. They don't think that it was her dad. They think it was somebody else. And then her other brother got his leg caught in a gasoline fire, and her dad refused to take him to the hospital, so he laid in pain for like 2-3 weeks until his leg healed up. Her mom, I guess till this day, still makes like healing remedies, like homeopathy type stuff, essential oil based stuff. That she says she can like snap her fingers and determine what kind of energy and what kind of healing stuff they need. And she escapes this world of like, she escapes this world of isolation. She talks about the school bus driving by her house every day. She didn't get a birth certificate until she was 9. She only had one brother or 2 brothers who graduated. No brothers graduated high school. 2 brothers attended high school, but their dad pulled them out. And it is just insane the amount of stuff that this girl had to go through. And what happens is, she gets sucked into this like indoctrination of like extreme right wing Mormonism type stuff, and the only school that will accept homeschool like Mormons from her background is like BYU in Utah. She lives in Idaho. She convinces her dad to try to like not be so mad about her applying to school, even though he's like super furious about her applying to school. She says it's a Mormon school. She finally gets out after all these accidents and on all this stuff about her dad like buying weapons and installing tanks underground and like food supplies and all this stuff that's being paid for by like her mother's business. There's a huge divide between her and her brothers. Her brothers are a couple of her brothers are abusive to her really bad. Her parents won't stick up to him. Her mom's afraid to like cause any sort of rift. Her mom is very kind of submissive to like the family patriarchy. And she finally gets to BYU. She runs into all these mainstream Mormons. She talks about specifically when she got into her first apartment, and her roommate was wearing sweatpants that said Pink on the back of them, like the brand Pink, on her butt, and she like locked herself in her room in her apartment and like isolated herself because she didn't want to be around any of those kind of mainstream Mormons. And one of the most shocking things that really just kind of gets you the perspective on how she was raised. Like she didn't know. She knew about Ruby Ridge, and her dad was like super obsessed with like the guys that were killed in Idaho by the FBI or the ATF, and was like super getting prepared for the end days and all of the federal agents that were going to swarm on their house because Ruby Ridge, their family was just like the Westover family, and her dad just just pounded into them the end of days. And even like Y2K, when 2000 rolled around, all the computers were supposed to shut down. He stayed up watching the news, and of course nothing happened. He was like almost defeated the next day. Like he hated it because he'd been spent all this time preparing. But anyway, so she's in a freshman like art history course at BYU. And they're looking at all these artists. Of course, she's never heard of any of them. She's never heard of Picasso. She's never heard of Van Gogh. She's never heard of any of these people. And they get to a painting in the textbook, and she's really confused because she's like, she doesn't know what the painting is supposed to be, and she's reading at the bottom of the painting. She taught herself, but she really didn't. She didn't even know how to read until she was like 7 or 8. Like she never. We're talking no elementary school. She couldn't read until like her late young years, like probably like right before she turned 10. She's in a freshman art history class, and she comes across this word that she's not sure what the word means, and she's like a genuine question, raises her hand, and there's only one girl in the class that she knows. It's her roommate that she's not really super close with yet. She raises her hand and asks the professor what that word means, and he like raises his eyebrows and like looks at the rest of the class and just goes, "Thank you for that. We're gonna move on." And thought she was joking, and she just like shrunk. She said she shrunk down. She felt like 2 feet tall. She felt awful. All the people were looking at her, judging her. Like she could feel like her classmates hated her for whatever reason. She had no idea what this word was. So as soon as class gets out, she sprints to the library, gets on the internet, and Googles the word. And the word is Holocaust. And she's never even heard the Holocaust in her life. When she was educated, homeschooled. She didn't. Her dad never taught her about the oppression of the Jews. They heard all the time. She said she knew very well the Boston Massacre in 1775, whenever the British opened fire on a crowd in Boston. She said she knew that, and that she knew American history pretty well. But like when it came to stuff outside of what her dad was interested in, she knew nothing. And she immediately knew that like her what she knew was so narrow that she couldn't. She felt like she couldn't escape that. And she goes into her sophomore year, and like every year, she's just getting a little bit further and further away from her family, because like she's learning, she's becoming educated. She starts to question what she's been told. She's had one brother. She had one brother who left before her. There's 7 kids. She's like the second to the youngest daughter, and she has an older brother who goes to school and went to Idaho State, got a degree in chemistry, and then she has another sister or brother who went to, I can't remember. There's one other sibling who went to school, and she's just like documenting their separation, her separation, and then her sibling separation from their family. And there's even one part where she's like, she flies in from the whole point of the book is that she goes from this oppressive, like super controlling family, and then eventually gets her PhD from Cambridge, like the most esteemed university in the world, like the university, like where Isaac Newton attended, like the university. She gets her PhD from there, and she's in like her PhD program. She goes back and forth between she eventually she gets her master's, I think, from Harvard, and then she goes back and forth between Harvard and Cambridge, and graduates from Cambridge with her PhD. And she talks about how she flies back from Cambridge to see her family in Idaho, and her dad is like in their kitchen, and she is reading something on the couch, just trying to like relax, and her dad's like, "You ought to be in the kitchen where a woman needs to be." And she knew that like at that moment, like the divide between her father and her was so vast. And there's one particular scene where it's the best part of the book, but I gotta say it. There's this particular scene where like she's getting abused by her older brother, and used to, whenever she was getting abused by her older brother, she could like crawl, but she could look in the mirror and like find her 16-year-old self that was super submissive and weak, and wasn't educated and wasn't confident. And then now she's been to Cambridge and Yale or Harvard and BYU, and she's confident in herself, and like she tries to find that little girl in the mirror again to try to make every part of her family back the way it was, and like it's not there because she's just a completely changed person. It's beautiful. And her father flies in when she's at Harvard. Her father flies into her apartment, stays with him for 2 weeks or a week, even though she offered to pay for a hotel, and there's like a little bitty dorm that she's staying in, but they wanted to stay with her. And he like offers her a blessing, cleansing thing that Mormon priests give to people, and like all of her, she said like all of her judgments from her family could be washed away in an instant if she just accepted it. But she just couldn't. She knew who she was as a person, and she couldn't accept it. And eventually, when she talked about her brother's abuse to her family, her brother actually like threatened her with a knife at one point, killed a dog that he owned to make a point. And all the family is just like in denial about how her brother is treating her, and about the death of this dog. Is like she said that there had been stray dogs that showed up to their property, and they'd always had to shoot them. They wouldn't just like kill them with a knife like her brother did. And her family was just taking their side because he was scared of her, and no one wanted to upset dad or upset the brother. And then her only sister turned on her, and then like there's this, and then it's insane because there's 7 kids. 4 of the kids, and the bottom like half of the kids didn't get birth certificates until way later, and like her parents didn't even, her parents, like she doesn't know her birthday. She knows it's at the end of September, but her parents never like cared enough to like write it down or like learn it. They just knew that it was at the end of September, and they'd let her pick a day, the last week of September, to have her birthday party. So she has no idea when her birthday is exactly. And there's this huge split in the family where like out of 7 kids, 3 of the kids have PhDs. She has a PhD in history. Her brother has a PhD in chemistry, and her other brother has a PhD in engineering, I think. And the other 4 kids did not even finish high school or have a GED. Absolutely insane. And the 4 kids, that don't have any kind of education. They, to this day, as far as I know, according to the book, they still live in Idaho. They still live with the same abusive father and the same submissive mother who runs this homeopathic care place, and it's just the amount of like just divide in her family because the education that the three of them have is insane. She talked about they went back to a wedding. It was the first time she'd seen her father in like 2 years, and she hasn't. As far as the book, she hasn't talked to her father since like I think 2016 or 15 or so. She remembers the last time she talked to him like at Christmas, and she like he couldn't accept her for who she was, and she wanted to meet with. She drove back to her hometown and wanted to meet with her mother for like dinner, and her mom wouldn't go unless her father could come, and she was like, I can't meet with dad because he's being abusive or whatever. And there's even one particular scene where her grandparents, the one that she had the choice to run away with, they go to Arizona once a year for a long period of time because her grandfather, the grandmother's husband, has like health problems, and the Idaho winters are too brutal for him, so he has to go to Arizona where it's sunny. He stays there for 2 or 3 months and comes back, and they have like a mobile home in Arizona that they live in. That they're driving back from their grandma's house in Arizona, and her dad, because he hates, like, this dude doesn't have a driver's license. This dude hasn't done his taxes in like 20 years. This dude hasn't done anything government related at all. They're driving, and he takes all the seat belts out of their car because he does not want to have to obey seatbelt laws. They take all the seats out of the back of this van, put like a mattress on the bottom, and there's two people up front, and everybody's laying on the back. And one of the kids is driving and gets in a wreck, and the police show up, and they're trying to figure out why this guy has no insurance, he has no driver's license, there are no seat belts, or the car's not registered. He eventually gets back to Idaho, doesn't go to a hospital, lets his wife treat him with this homeopathic bullcrap. And then years later, they're making the same trip. A snowstorm comes through, and this kid, one of the young kid, not a young kid, one of like the teenage boys is driving in the snow, and pulls over and says, "Dad, we can't drive through this. Like, we have to stop and wait for this snowstorm to pass." And her dad, because he's spiteful and arrogant and a butthole, decides to hop in the driver's wheel because I'm a man and I can do it, right? Hops in the driver's seat, gets behind the wheel, and crashes the van in a snowbank and totals the other car. And she falls underneath the mattress, and she remembers like everyone's cut up looking for her because they thought that she got ejected from the van and she didn't. But like back to back times they wrecked and they didn't have seatbelts, and this time it was specifically her dad's fault because he wanted to take over from his son who said that it was unsafe and they just needed to wait, and he thought that he was a man and could do it, and he even like made it a point to drive faster than he was going, and then he got in a wreck because he's a freaking idiot. I mean, you just like. You want her to win so bad, and it's a true story. And she comes out at the end. She gets her PhD from the most esteemed university in the world, and her three of her siblings have never even had like high school math or like a world history class ever. And her other two brothers have PhDs in very strenuous subjects like engineering and chemistry, and she is just like the divide between her family and her. It's so relatable. Like anytime you disagree with your parents, and it's just it's such a great book. It's like 300 pages. I read it in 2.5 days just because I could not put it down. Because like you need to see how she turns out from like her abusive family, and like no one takes her side besides her older brothers who wind up going to get their PhDs and stuff. And she's like on her own for a little bit, and it's just so tough. It's so heart-wrenching to see this, like how many kids are out there that could be doctors in whatever subject they want to be, or they could be teachers, or they could be like a scientist, they could be an engineer, whatever, but their family structure, like their culture, just suppresses it so much to where they can't get out of it. If you're feeling like where you're at in life is holding you back, like your family's holding you back, or your cultural, like the norms around you are holding you back, you need to read this book. This book will change your life forever. It's so good. It's so impactful. There's so many anecdotes in there, and like her father winds up, because he's trying to do everything in a hurry and make money. He winds up, he's a scrapper. So like this one time he has all these old scrap cars that still have gas in the gas tank, and the scrapyard won't take cars with gas in them, obviously, because they could explode whenever they get processed. So he goes around and has a system of like knocking a hole in the gas tank, catching the gas, and then restrapping the gas tank to the back of the car, and then shipping the car on a trailer to the scrapper. And there's one point before that too, where like she almost kills Tara, the main character, like the main character, real person, because he's just like negligent and just assumes that she'll take care of herself. And she's like, he's fixing to, she has her, he wants to do the work faster, so he tells her to hop up into this bin, and he pulls forward to the edge of this trailer and is like waiting for her to jump out. She doesn't jump out, so he just says, "Oh, she'll probably be okay," and just like dumps her out with the scrap metal, and she almost dies, and she's like 12. But so the time her dad is like taking the gas tanks out, winds up skipping a step because he's trying to go in a hurry, and cuts the straps holding the gas tank off with his oxyacetylene torch before he knocks the hole in the bottom to drain the gas out. So of course the gas tank catches on fire. It burns his face. It like calluses his ear really bad. Like she said, like she could see his nose. Like his whole face was burned, and he refused to go to the hospital. He wanted his wife to treat him. She gave him some more of that homeopathic bullcrap. He's scarred up super bad, and then he's going around claiming that like God, like this, it's like his God is like using him as an example for like why we don't need to go to medical establishments or like a doctor or whatever because they're evil, and it's all part of the state government trying to take control of your life and not make you Christian or whatever. I mean, it's just so much stuff built up. And then then her brother, one of the most, the last little story I'll tell from this, and that'll be the end of it. But her brother like gets in this bad motorcycle wreck. She can see like the side of his brain. She's really worried that he's like going to die. And she's driving back. She was following him home from, they were like going out to eat or something. She's following him home. He gets in a motorcycle wreck in front of him. A deer runs out in front of him out of nowhere. He hits or a cow or whatever runs out in front of the motorcycle. He hits it. It's not his fault. Just like an unfortunate accident. He skids his head on the side of the pavement and like the side of his brain. Like she can see like a little bit of his brain on the side, and she's terrified that he's gonna die. And so she gets him in her car and defies her dad. Like she called her dad and asked him what he should do, and he said that she should take her brother home and let his mom treat him because that's what God wants. And she is like in this crossroads. She's like, "No, I can see the side of my brother's head," and her dad's like, "Take him home. Mom will take care of it." And her mom's like not a doctor. She's like a midwife because she serves all these other people who don't want to go to doctors either. And she defies her dad, takes him to an actual hospital, and then her family goes to the hospital waiting room while her brother's in there, and just like the amount of like remorse and hatred they had for her, or not remorse, the amount of hatred they had for her for doing that, it just like really illustrates how bad of a situation that she was in, because her family hated the fact that she took her brother to the hospital when she could see like the side of his head split open. I mean, it's just so good. It's such a good memoir. Like if you're interested in writing a memoir, or you think you have a story worth telling, you need to read this book. She gets her PhD from Cambridge. Her PhD advisor at Cambridge hears her story and encourages her to write this. So shout out to him, whatever his name is, for getting her to write this, because it's great. She deals with imposter syndrome, like she shouldn't be here because her parents are so bad. She avoids questions about her family, like she never tells. She won, like for instance, she won some academic award at BYU, and they asked, like she did an interview and they asked her what school she went to and whatever, and she like dodged every question and said she had great teachers, blah 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 blah. And then her dad has the audacity to show up, and then they don't go to her graduation either. By the way, like they don't go to her BYU graduation when she gets her bachelor's. It's heartbreaking. She's looking for him in the crowd, and they're like late because they don't care, or they don't even show up, I don't think. But he gets upset with her in this interview for not mentioning the fact that she was homeschooled, when like he was the one pulling them out of homeschool to begin with to go work in a scrapyard, and she like grows up knowing nothing, teaching herself math because she doesn't go to a math class, and he has the audacity to say, "Why didn't you mention that you were homeschooled in the thing? It'd be a good way to stick it to those liberal daggum communist professors." And she's just like the divide between her and her family and her dad is just so massive. It's just such a heart-wrenching story. You gotta read it. It's Educated by Tara Westover. The book will absolutely change your life. It's so good. You'll read it in like 3 days probably. I just finished, like today as I'm filming this, Crime and Punishment by Fyodor Dostoevsky. That book took me probably September to March, so like 6 months, 5 months to read, just because it's like you just gotta invest a lot of time in it. This book, I needed a break from that book for a little bit, and I bought this just because it was highly recommended. And I'm telling you, it was worth every penny. Go get it. Get it on your Kindle. Get it on your Audible. Get it in a paper format. Whatever you got to do. Get a hold of this book and read it, because it will change your life. It will make you grateful for the things you have. If you live in a household that is even tolerable of you being somewhat independent, you will realize how fortunate you are. And this made me appreciate my parents so much, because growing up, you kind of think, I had great parents. I just kind of assumed that everybody had parents like mine. I assumed every parents had stable jobs. A lot of people don't. A lot of people have abusive parents, or parents that are stressed a whole lot, and that turns over into how they raise their kids. And I mean, she just goes through all of it. It's so bad, and she comes out on top. It's a win. It's a true story. She gets her master's degree from Harvard, and then she gets accepted to the PhD program at Cambridge. And she writes history now for a living, and she's a writer. And this book has probably made her a millionaire because it's so good. You got to read it. It's Educated by Tara Westover, published in 2008. It's a New York Times bestseller. Bill Gates reviewed it. It's an amazing story, truly inspiring, the kind of book everyone will enjoy. It's even better than you've heard. So that kind of sums it up. It's better than what I've said about it. Go get this book. Go read it. It will change your life. I can't say it enough. Highly recommend it. And like this podcast, with like the main thing is focusing on academic growth and physical growth, physical health. This will just make you appreciate education and the limitless potential you have whenever you get it, whenever you learn how to learn. You've got to read this book. It's so good. Anyway, thank y'all for watching. My name is Isaac Jones. Check me out on Twitter at DBD Isaac, on YouTube. If you're on Spotify, you can look me up at Dumb Before Dawn Podcast. If you're on YouTube and see this and you want to check out Spotify, check out Dumb Before Dawn Podcast on Spotify. You can follow my personal account on Instagram at Skin and Bones Jones. This video was filmed on Tuesday and it'll probably be posted Friday. Thank y'all for listening. Signing off. I will see y'all next time. Go get this book, guys. Read it. It'll change your life. Educated by Tara Westover, #1 New York Times bestseller. Thank y'all. See y'all next time.